Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Metabolism and Menopause podcast. My name is Stephanie, and I am your host and CEO of Vitality OET. We are a women's nutrition, health, and fitness company that focuses predominantly on women's hormones, particularly as they start going through perimenopause and onwards. We know that this time in your life comes with so much change: hot flashes, night sweats, irritability, brain fog, and of course, this belly fat that comes around out of absolutely nowhere despite you not changing anything. So you go back to cutting calories, cutting carbs, doing a ton of cardio, the things that used to work all the time, but for some reason, now they're not working, you feel worse, and you're feeling desperate and hopeless, and you're just going absolutely insane. But we know now that your body is inherently different than it used to be because of these hormonal changes. So our whole goal and our mission here at Vitality is to help you understand what's going on in your body, how to take care of your body, get back in control of your body again so you can live a life full of vitality, reach those health and fitness goals so you don't have to diet ever again. So today I have the wonderful Coach Brittany with me today. You guys may remember a podcast that we did in the past on hysterectomies, and we touched on pelvic floor a little bit there, but we got a ton of questions. So we are going to go more specifically into pelvic floor today. Coach Brittany is also a birthing doula, which is awesome. So she knows so many things about this area. And we also know that pelvic floor is something that is a big concern once we start going through perimenopause and menopause. So there are so many things that can happen in this time of our life, and we're going to touch on a lot of them today, but there is one aspect that is related to pelvic floor changes, but it's also its own complex web of causes, concerns, treatments, and sexual health and libido. And again, while it is part of the pelvic floor changes that we experience, and we'll touch on briefly today, we will have to do a whole separate podcast on different aspects of libido because there is a ton of information on that as well. So as you can see, every podcast Brittany and I do together, it's like, okay, we're going to talk about this, we're going to touch on this, but that'll be a different one. So there's always going to be something else down the pipe with us.
Yeah, probably.
So first of all, we should probably discuss what the pelvic floor actually is. It's made up of 3 layers of muscle, tissue, and fascia, and it sits like a bowl-like structure that's at the base of your pelvis. You can also think of it almost like a hammock that is slung across the bottom of the pelvis that supports all your organs there. The pelvic floor has different attachment points: the upper crest, or where you would put your hands on your hips, the sits bones if you were to put your hands under your glutes, and your coccyx, which is the top of your butt crack. So the pelvic floor also attaches from the front of the pelvis and wraps around those sit bones all the way around the coccyx to the front of the pelvis, the back of the pelvis. It covers a lot of area, actually. People think it's like one small area. It's not. It's actually very large. And there are 7 main roles of the pelvic floor: to hold in urine and feces, to release when needed and when appropriate, for healthy sexual function, to hold up and support the organs of the pelvis like the bladder, the uterus, the rectum, the cervix. It helps pump blood back up to the heart. It helps to stabilize your core, which is very huge, and helps support your body's lymphatic system. So as you can tell, there is a lot of stuff that's really important for your pelvic floor to make sure it's functioning properly. It's responsible for a lot of things.
Yeah, it is. And I think the most important thing to talk about is we need to have the ability to utilize both the strength component and the relaxation component in the pelvic floor in order to have optimal performance over a longer period of time, but also in day-to-day functions, right? Our everyday life. And I think there's so much focus on I need to have a strong pelvic floor. I think that's what we hear all the time, right? We need to strengthen. But in reality, we need to have both aspects, right? So there's a lot of different changes that can happen over the course of our lives that affect our pelvic floor health. Pregnancy, birth, postpartum, our lifestyle choices, and then, of course, perimenopause and menopause. So I have a really cool fact that I love to share with people, and it's that our pelvic floor is super unique in the sense that it gets direct input from our fight or flight response system. So if you're feeling overly stressed out, if you feel the need to protect yourself, if you worry or you have fears, then there's a naturally protective mechanism in the pelvic floor, and it responds with a contraction and it creates tension. So we'll actually touch on this a little bit later in the conversation, but I just wanted to give you like this super interesting and eye-opening tidbit for you guys. So now that we have discussed what the pelvic floor is, let's discuss some of the common issues we see with the pelvic floor changes during perimenopause and menopause. Now remember, not everyone is going to have these symptoms. Some people will have them. Some people won't have any. Some people will have some of the symptoms to some degree, but these are all possibilities. And they're all things that happen most commonly. Now, one caveat to that is that while these may be common, they are not normal, and we do not have to live with them. In fact, we should do everything that we can to improve our quality of life, especially when it comes to our sexual health and bladder and bowel function.
And I think that's like a really huge thing is realizing, like, we always talk about cortisol. I don't think it never comes up on a topic of some way, shape, or form. And that's that stress response that Brittany was talking about where everything kind of tightens up. So again, this is why it's another really big reason to make sure that we're talking about that, controlling that, because it does affect so much more than we even realize. And the whole aspect of like, just because it's common or a lot of people experience it, it doesn't mean it's normal. And like lots of doctors, for example, will tell you things are quote unquote normal, but that's because they're seeing people who are coming to them with problems all the time. So to them, it might seem normal because they see it all the time, but it's not. It's common. It's not normal. There's a very big difference there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So as you know, the changes that happen in pelvic floor are brought on by hormones. Like hormones affect so many things in our body, and pelvic floor is just one of them. And when we start to lose estrogen, it starts to decrease during this perimenopause and menopause. It starts to affect blood flow. It starts to affect lubrication of vaginal tissues and the muscles of the pelvic floor. And this can cause the tissues of the vagina, the vulva, the urethra to lose their elasticity, to become thinner and even cause pain. So the muscles of the pelvic floor also become thinner and less flexible as well. And with the changes in estrogen levels, we are also going to see a change in the pH levels of the vagina, leading to increased risk of infections. So people will be like, oh, I started getting like all these issues out of nowhere. And like, what the heck is happening? Lovely estrogen. Another thing that happens when estrogen goes down, which is so frustrating, is we already know we have a harder time building and maintaining muscle. We already have a harder time being able to maintain bone mass. We have a harder time regulating blood sugars and inflammation. So this is just another perk that comes along with estrogen going down, which everyone's like, Steph, the first half of your podcast every time just make me so upset because we always give you bad news. So we will give you solutions and positive things afterwards, I promise. So there are some things that like, here are some of the symptoms that'll happen, possibly that can happen over time. And we're going to detail some of those more common issues and symptoms, but you're going to experience changes in pelvic floor health, that vaginal dryness, burning, itching, vaginal atrophy, shortening or narrowing of the vaginal canal. So that's when everything tightens or even weakens. Decrease in sexual desire, so your libido goes down. Incontinence, vaginal irritation, especially during foreplay or intercourse. Frequent vaginal infections like BV, thrush, and UTIs. That's a common one that I hear about all the time. People are like, why am I getting all these UTIs? Yes, this is a thing. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, pelvic pain, and in worst case scenario, pelvic organ prolapse. So now we've talked about the potential issues and all these wonderful things that happen that we start seeing when hormone changes in perimenopause and menopause. Let's touch on some of the more common issues and the symptoms.
Yeah. And I think you're right. I think the beginning of the podcast is always like the doom and gloom, right? This is what can happen. But like also we do want to talk about like, here's the things that we can do ourselves. Because like we said, we don't want to have to, these things might be common. They happen to a lot of people. They're not normal. We want to be able to have solutions, right? And so it's really helpful to know like what's common, what maybe to expect, and then things that you can do for it, right? So I'm going to touch on incontinence. So urinary incontinence is one of the most common symptoms that I hear from a lot of women. 1 in 3 women will actually experience some type of incontinence, such as leaking of urine when they're sneezing, laughing, coughing, or exercising. This is also known as stress incontinence. Maybe it's leaking of urine or having the inability to hold in urine when you hear water running, or like if you know that you have to go to the bathroom and you're like, oh, I got to get there, and then you don't quite make it and you have a leak. This is called urge incontinence. And leaking can really be anything from just like a light little dribble to a full-on release. sometimes it's due to lack of estrogen in the system, like we just mentioned before. And it kind of can affect the valve of the bladder. So as your bladder valve gets weaker, this can cause the leakage or incontinence that you're experiencing, but it can also be caused by a weakened pelvic floor. And things that could be really helpful would be to try and stop drinking 2 hours prior to bedtime. Practicing something called the core and floor connection breath, especially doing that while you're in bed, is a way to de-stress, connect with your pelvic floor, relax, bring your cortisol levels down. Avoiding bladder irritants at night, like coffee, alcohol, caffeine, and even chocolate. And then to also go pee right before you go to bed, right? Those can all be really, really helpful with incontinence issues. And then the other type of incontinence that isn't talked about as often, but 1 in 5 women over the age of 40 will experience, is fecal incontinence. And this is a loss of stool. And so this can look like a sudden urge to have a bowel movement. After a bowel movement, we have a loss of stool, like as we're wiping, or even with certain activities like walking or changing positions or even lifting something heavy.
Yeah, exactly. And this is it's super common. And I think a lot of people don't like to talk about it because they're so embarrassed and they think that they're the only ones struggling with it. So like Brittany said, we're always sharing the doom and gloom, but we are going to give you some actionable steps and stuff. But if this is something you're struggling with, do not be embarrassed, because that happens to literally 1 in 5 people is the fecal incontinence, and then 1 in 3 for urinary. It's so much more common than you realize. So you don't have to be embarrassed. There's because this is so common, there are things that you can do to help you, and talking about it's gonna be really important. So the next one we're gonna talk about is kind of the opposite, constipation. So this is where we have infrequent bowel movements, or a bowel movement every 2 to 3 days. I've talked to women who only have a bowel movement once a week. And it can be considered the feeling of incomplete emptying of the bowel. So you go to the bathroom and you're like, I just don't I feel like there's stuff that has to come out of me, but it's just I feel like I have to poop, but I can't poop. What's going on? Or feeling like you need to strain or to push to have a bowel movement. Stool that is overly bulky, hard, or even pellet-like. Constipation usually exacerbates the issues listed above, like what we talked about with the incontinence, due to pressure on that pelvic system, as well as pressure that we use to have a bowel movement. And constipation is a big issue. It's a pelvic floor issue. It can also be a hydration issue. It can be not eating enough, not getting enough fiber, but also stress. If we are in a high stress state and cortisol is really high, we're going to see we have a really hard time going to the washroom because our digestive system really slows down. So this is another reason why it's so important, because not only will it help you digest things better when you de-stress and you're eating enough, but also it's going to help you with your pelvic floor to relax, because we talked about how stress can really tighten things up. And that'll make it really hard for you to go to the washroom as well. When we're not expelling things, we're just reabsorbing toxins that our body's trying to get out. And that includes excess hormones, which can then lead to other hormonal imbalances, making weight loss more challenging, making hormonal symptoms worse. So this is actually a very common issue that we see. And this is something we ask about all the time. People are like, oh my gosh, I pooped 2 times today. I'm so excited. We're like, yes, we're getting there. This is what we want to hear.
Always celebrating the bowel movements, right? You poop, we have a party. It's really, it's funny working in this industry sometimes. So the other thing that can be really, really common that we touched on was urethral irritation. And so people are probably like, what the heck is that? But a lot of people actually have this symptom, and this is pain in the vulvar area, pain with urination. I hear that a lot. Frequent bladder infections, UTIs, yeast infections that are just so frequent. It's almost like you get one after another. Itchiness, or even an increased urgency to urinate. So the bigger problem here is that when we get these frequent infections, or we're constantly getting them, we're being constantly treated for these infections, right? And the way that we're usually being treated for these infections is with antibiotics. And so the antibiotics that we're given not only kill off the bacteria that's causing the infection, but also the good bacteria. And we really, really need good bacteria in the vagina to help protect and prevent against bladder infections and yeast infections and all the things that we're actually taking the antibiotics to get rid of. So it's kind of like this catch-22.
And it's the same with gut health too, right? Like you'll see this in people all the time. If they've been on a ton of rounds of antibiotics, gut health is like horrible. Like not only are they stressed in their system, but like they're more inflamed, they're more bloated, like they have like leaky gut type symptoms. They start having sensitivities, and it's because we kill the good and bad bacteria everywhere. Like, so it's not a great thing that we're constantly on these things all the time. So really getting to the root cause as to why this is happening and fixing that situation is really, really important.
Yeah.
How do I say this word, Brittany? Dyspareunia?
Dyspareunia.
Oh, I did it. What a good guess.
You
oh
did.
My goodness. Dyspareunia. Look at me go. Okay. So long story short, long word to not long word is pain with sex. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm going to refer to it as because I don't like that word. I like to keep things blunt straight to the point. But again, this is something people don't like to talk about, or they're uncomfortable, or they don't like telling their partners about, or they just like stop having sex altogether because it's just too painful and they just think that's how it is now. This happens to 1 in 5 women. They're going to experience some type of pain with intercourse or sexual activity. So there is a myriad of reasons why women feel decreased sexual function, low libido, and pain during this time in their life. And of course, it's that lack of lovely estrogen that can be one of the main reasons. It causes thinner tissues, so it's not as lubricated. It's super thin, which can cause pain, sometimes bleeding during intercourse, increased stress levels, lack of sleep, not feeling comfortable with how your body looks, lack of intimate connection with your partner. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. But things that can help with the physical aspects are water-soluble lubricants to help minimize any chafing and friction and improve pleasure. And you can also look into topical hormone creams that help to plump up the vaginal tissues to improve moisture and to improve comfort. So if we can increase our sexual pleasure, most likely an increase in desire will follow. Because like if it's painful, of course you're not going to want to do that. That's going to affect your relationships. So trying to help yourself in the physical aspect as much as you can be really, really helpful. And you can also look into an all-natural hormone-free moisturizer like coconut oil, vitamin E, or other all-natural balms that can really help manage symptoms of dryness that you may feel. I've had lots of clients say vitamin E has been like very incredible for them personally. Mm-hmm. But it is true. Like there are so many things that can contribute to this. But again, you notice that stress made its way in there. Lack of sleep made its way in there. So there's actually so many women that you've worked with who started increasing their calories. They started eating enough carbohydrates. And now they're like, oh my gosh, my libido is back. Like my husband, I'm surprised he hasn't messaged you. And I'm like, yes, we're also changing relationships. Love this industry. We accomplish it in the oddest ways sometimes, but hey, it works.
It's true. And I think that this is something that a lot of women are really, really, really embarrassed about. They don't want to talk about it. But I can tell you 99% of my clients, one of their biggest things is low to no libido. And I'm not feeling a connection to my husband. It hurts when I have sex. I don't know how to tell my husband that it hurts. So I just don't have it. And so I think it's really important to know that you're not alone, but 2, there are so many things that we can do, to help with it. So I'm going to talk about kind of one of the worst case scenarios when it comes to pelvic floor symptoms and pelvic floor health, and that's called pelvic organ prolapse. And so studies have shown that about 50% of women over the age of 50 will experience some kind of change in the position of where their bladder, cervix, uterus, or rectum sits in their pelvis, right? A shift. And so we talked earlier about how the pelvic floor muscles support all of our pelvic organs, like the things I just listed, right? The uterus, the bladder, rectum, and cervix. And some people experience increases in like urinary leakage when they run, jump, cough, or sneeze, due to like thinning and weakening of the vaginal tissue and the pelvic floor muscles. But also a lot of it has to do with that change in position that these women are experiencing, right? And so the weakness that we're feeling can happen. It leads to or even contributes to pelvic organ prolapse. This is where our pelvic floor muscles and ligaments stop supporting the organs that I listed, and they drop down and press into the walls of the vagina. And so they're kind of like coming in, so to speak, right? And this can feel like a heaviness or even a pressure in your pelvis. It could feel a lot of the times I hear like a tampon is coming out of my vagina, even though I don't have a tampon in, or even another sensation of just something kind of coming out of the vagina, a bulge at the opening of the vagina, a feeling of something rubbing, or general heaviness and just discomfort in the pelvis. And even like the inability to completely empty your bladder or your bowels. And it tends to get worse like towards the end of the day, right? Because if we think about it, we're standing, we're walking, we're doing things all day long. And so gravity and all the stuff that we've done, and now all of a sudden it's the end of the day and everything just feels really, really heavy, right? Prolapse tends to be more common in women who've had like a muscle tear in childbirth. So what we would consider a 3rd or 4th degree tear, or even an episiotomy. Or even for those who have birthed larger babies, who have smoked, who carry extra weight, who have done high intensity workouts or like running, jumping, heavy weightlifting, women who have had chronic coughs. But again, the caveat to that is also somebody can have pelvic organ prolapse and never have had any of those things happen either, right? You're just at a slightly increased risk of developing pelvic organ prolapse with those things.
Exactly. And there are lots of things that can be helpful for this whole like pelvic floor situation that you're dealing with. And that's going to be regular exercise, as well as like relaxation habits like yoga, decreasing your stress. This is going to be huge. And how do we decrease stress? We make sure that we're eating enough food, eating enough carbs, that we're focusing on recovery, that we're like doing self-care in some way, shape, or form. We have a whole other podcast I did on cortisol. So make sure that you're going back and listening to that one, because that one will list off everything that you could possibly imagine. It's a super great resource to head to. We also have a cortisol guide too that you can always like email me and I'll be happy to send that over. That has so much information, but that's a really big one, like really, really big one. Because if we can do that, it's also going to improve your sleep, which is going to help with your pelvic floor as well, improving your gut microbiome. And then also like learning proper coordination of the pelvic floor and core canister muscles, improving your posture and your breathing practices, making sure like you can also use like topical estrogen creams, HRT, vaginal lubricants, using non-perfumed soap, detergents, and moisturizers, because those can like increase irritation. So if that's one of the symptoms you're experiencing, that can be a super helpful thing just to help with that symptom. You can also avoid wearing tight clothes or even like thong underwear. So look for more breathable fabrics and clothes that don't fit too snugly around your stomach or pelvis, because again, that can cause like more irritation and pressure and just feeling uncomfortable. Learning how to pee and poop correctly. So like don't try and push your pee out. Don't try and strain with bowel movements. Even actually adding the squatty potty, which like people are like, does it actually work? Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely it does. Amazing. So allowing your body just to be in a better position to have a bowel movement, so it's like less stressful. It's just more natural. It's just easier on your body. If you ride a bike or you do spin classes or ride a motorcycle, it can add a lot of pressure to the pelvic floor as well. So if you're having issues with pain, that can make it worse, or even like nerve pain. So try and make sure that seat is padded. Sit slightly back on the seat so most of the pressure is off the front and off of your vagina and the pelvic floor, so it's not as much pressure. And then also keeping blood sugars at a healthy level is very important too. That does not mean cutting out your carbs. Do not do that. We did a whole podcast on insulin resistance and one on carbs. Go listen to those. Do not cut out your carbs and your cortisol will be high and it doesn't matter anyways. So do not cut out your carbs ever. And most importantly is also finding yourself a care provider that listens to you and that trusts, like that you feel like you can trust, because like that's really, really huge. I personally, when I was going through some stuff, I finally found, like I went through like quite a few different doctors, unfortunately, because like just people kept moving, or like I moved, or I just didn't feel like I trusted them. And I had one really good doctor who asked me, how's like your relationships? Do you enjoy your job? I'm like, oh my gosh, you care about me. This is really nice. But then she moved, so that sucked. Then I found an OBGYN and she was amazing. Like I asked her questions. She showed me pictures. She explained things. Never made me feel like I was asking like a stupid question. Like it was just really nice to feel like someone actually like heard and understood me and like what my like concerns were with like my PCOS. She was great. But then I moved and she's like, oh, you got to find someone in your own city. And I was like, I would drive 2 hours to see you. Right? So Now we're on the hunt again, but it makes a huge difference when you have a healthcare provider that like you feel heard by, you can trust and don't feel like they're belittling you or anything like that. It goes a long way.
Mm-hmm.
So here is where I touch again on the interesting fact that Brittany told us, where there's that connection to our fight or flight response and our pelvic floor. So that lovely hormone cortisol. So when you're feeling overly stressed and very anxious, if we have a million things to do, we're rushing around, taking our kids places, and you're watching grandkids, whatever it may be, and we just feel like we don't have enough time, we're taking care of everybody else, our aging parents, maybe we're dealing with grief and trauma and financial stress and work stress and all the things that happen in life, plus we're under eating and all that wonderful stuff. If we feel misunderstood in our relationships, even if communication isn't there anymore, if we're healing from those past traumas and triggers, our pelvic floor will actually feel this and it will respond with a protective mechanism and it pulls in and tightens to help protect us. It's just like a natural protective instinct. A large portion of what can be helpful is to learn how to de-stress. So we talk about this all of the time, how it affects everything in our body. But of course, it also affects that pelvic floor. You're just going to feel tight and wound up all the time. So it's super important that you can find some ways of de-stressing daily, taking a bit of time to yourself to do some self-care, even if it's just 10 minutes, but also making sure that you're like chatting with your partner, that you do feel like safe and comfortable and tell them, hey, like I'm struggling right now, because like that's not going to be very good for not having pain when you're having intercourse. So making sure that you are communicating these things, and like, even if you feel quote unquote safe, but you're in a really stressed environment or in a stressed state, your body doesn't feel safe. So that's really important to like communicate. And then also something you really have to focus on. So cortisol, so much more important than you think it is.
Mm-hmm. So before I'm going to talk about like pelvic floor muscle exercises next, but I have a little story because it kind of correlates to like your hunt for a provider who could hear you. And then what you just mentioned about like, if we're not feeling safe and then our pelvic floor tightens and it hurts to have sex and everything. There is this one doctor in the area that I live in, and it is a woman. And her response every single time a client of mine comes into her and complains about pain with intercourse or vaginal atrophy or something like that is, oh, just have 2 glasses of wine and you'll be fine. And I just like, I can't even believe that. Like I have to laugh because if I don't, I'll cry about something like that. It's just so sad that is the thought process. So it's like these women are coming to her because they're in pain, and obviously their stress levels are probably high and all this stuff is happening in their life. But she just tells them to have 2 glasses of wine and it'll relax them enough to be able to have sex. It's like, wow.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I hope you guys will go to YouTube, because like, oh my gosh, the look on my face when she just told me that. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That is terrible.
Yeah. And it is.
But see, like, this is the problem, is like people just like slough stuff off and they're like, not a big deal. That's not a big problem. It could be worse. And I'm like, okay, but this is a problem that I'm dealing with right now and I would like to resolve it. So like, give me some tangible solutions. Plus, like if you listen to our alcohol podcast, not a great solution.
No,
not a great solution, because it's going to increase your cortisol more and increase your stress response and decrease your stress quality. And all that's going to increase your cortisol more, which leads to like not so great food habits, but also it's going to tighten up your pelvic floor, making it worse. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I'm just like, it's just,
it is pretty sad.
So frustrating. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's really sad. So
unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties and I lost Coach Brittany for the last 5 to 10 minutes of this podcast, which provides you with a lot of solutions. So it's a very important part that I now have to go over with you guys. So pelvic floor muscle exercises. Why are these exercises so helpful when it comes to improving the strength and elasticity of the pelvic floor? If we think of our pelvic floor like a bank account, we can assume that performing lifestyle choices and exercises that are supportive of our pelvic health are like making deposits into that bank account. However, when we start to have changes in hormones or in life, maybe it's going through pregnancy or postpartum, maybe it's working out intensely, or even perimenopause or menopause, our body then starts to take withdrawals from this bank account. And then what we're doing is we're asking our pelvic floor to do things for us when we are changing the factors that it normally works under. So if we have been slowly but surely doing exercises and putting deposits into that bank account, then when we make those withdrawals, we're going to have more of a savings for that strength and flexibility that we have built up. So by performing these exercises, we're going to increase muscle strength, muscle flexibility, connection to your pelvic floor, circulation and blood flow to your pelvic floor, and even promote the healing of infections. So now the caveat to this is that over 60% of women perform pelvic floor strengthening either inefficiently or incorrectly. So it's very important that you are able to follow videos or work with a trainer who's experienced in pelvic floor health, or find a pelvic floor health physiotherapist. Don't just assume that you can do 100 Kegels a day and be good. That will not help and can cause even more harm in the long run. And in reality, the only thing that we're working when we're doing that is the sphincters of the bladder. So we aren't actually strengthening or relaxing the entire pelvic floor. It's just the sphincter of your bladder. So the cue that we like to use when teaching clients to activate their pelvic floor correctly is the jellyfish. So think about laying on your back with your knees bent, and your feet are going to be flat on the floor, and you're going to place your hands on your belly, and you're going to inhale fully, feel that belly expand, and then when you exhale, you're going to feel the pelvic floor engage. So now you want to make sure that you're engaging the entire part of your pelvic floor, so it's not just doing a Kegel alone, but it's almost adding in a back Kegel, if you want to call it that. Or if you want to, it's almost that feeling when you want to stop yourself from passing gas. You add both of those two together and think of it as a jellyfish. So gently pulling up and then gently relaxing. So you want to be able to feel that full range of motion because both are equally important. We also know that full body strengthening is super important, not just as we age, but for our pelvic health. So make sure our core canister, our back, our hips, our glutes, abdominals, pelvic floor are strong and they're connected. I also think it's super important to talk about the differences in pelvic floor muscles. We always strive to have an equally and appropriately relaxed and strong pelvic floor, but we can have what's called a hypertonic pelvic floor, which is a pelvic floor that's overly tight and overactive. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's strong, it's just tight. So if that's the case, we should focus a little bit more on relaxation and lengthening. Or we can have the opposite, which is called a hypotonic pelvic floor, which means we have lower muscle tone and we need to practice strengthening and the endurance for those muscles because they tire out a lot easier. Symptoms can be the same whether you have a hypotonic floor or hypertonic pelvic floor. Both can have pain with intercourse, you can experience urinary leakage, and of course the other symptoms that we mentioned before that come along with that lovely drop in estrogen. So typically, when we work with someone, we're trying to figure out where they fall on that scale of hyper to hypo. And honestly, we usually incorporate both types of movements because we want to have both strength and flexibility. But when we see someone coming in with complaints of vaginal pain with intercourse, constipation and pain when they're trying to urinate, we're typically going to lean more towards the hypertonic pelvic floor where it's different, where someone comes in with pelvic prolapse, organ prolapse, or they start experiencing bowel or urinary incontinence and they kind of feel like vaginal laxity, then we're going to lean more towards the hypotonic pelvic floor. So here's a list of exercises for both types of pelvic floor, so both strengthening and relaxing. We do have a guide. The link is in the show notes for you to access that comes with videos of all of them and explanations for each. So there's core connection breath, glute bridges, which are so much more effective than Kegels, clamshells, squats, pelvic tilts, standing leg lifts and marches, bird dog, child pose, half kneeling hip flexor stretch. If you have hypotonic pelvic floor, you're going to do quick flick Kegels, heel slides, or even toe taps or marches. If you have a hypertonic floor, happy baby pose is amazing, can also help with digestion if you're experiencing constipation, as well as diaphragmatic breathing. So last but not least, there are some helpful herbs or supplements. Brittany was trained as a holistic nutritionist first, so she loves being able to find herbs and homeopathic supplements that can help support bodies. However, we always need to make sure that we are starting with a healthy lifestyle choices first. So that's like exercise and nutrition and just general lifestyle tips in general, like de-stressing, and then move to herbs and supplements because those really won't do much if you're not addressing the other stuff first. So some helpful ones are sea buckthorn oil. This helps with vaginal dryness and irritation. Vaginal probiotic, super helpful. Uva ursi, it helps with bladder infections and cysts. Hops can help increase your estrogen and progesterone levels naturally. It improves the thickness of vaginal tissue, as well as helping with vaginal pain and dryness. That is very helpful for someone who's experiencing pain during intercourse. There is Puraria mirifica. And that can improve vaginal lubrication after 12 weeks of daily use. And it can actually help restore vaginal wall lushness after 24 weeks of using it daily. And that would also then, of course, help alleviate pain with intercourse. Cranberry and D-mannose can help with UTIs and UTI prevention. Flaxseed has been really great for showing to reduce vaginal dryness. There's a mild estrogen effect, and it also helps plump the vaginal cells, but flaxseed also has omega-3s, which is really great for inflammation as well. So I hope that this episode was really helpful for you guys, that you feel empowered. If you know anyone who is struggling with pelvic pain, discomfort, or any of the symptoms that we talked about, please send them this podcast. As you know, we don't do paid ads or anything like that. The only way that information gets spread is through word of mouth and by people sharing. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you need some more resources, you can either email myself directly at stephanie@vitalityoet.com, or you can head to our Facebook community, the Metabolism and Menopause by Vitality. That community has over 17,000 women of the day of this recording. It'll probably be more by the time this gets released. But this is a place where we do weekly webinars. We hand out free resources every week. We actually have a link that you can download that you can head to, and it will send you all the information we have ever released within our Facebook group. So you have to be a member in order to get access to that. If you need help figuring out your calories, your food intake, just message me. I'm more than happy to help you do that as well for free. We are all about helping you as best as we can. And of course, that pelvic floor guide is in the show notes as well. So make sure you go and download that. But if you need anything at all, you guys, I'm always here to answer any and all questions to the best of my abilities. And if I don't know the answer, I will pass you off to one of my coaches who may be more specialized in a specific field. Again, hope this was helpful. Talk to you all soon and have a great rest of your day. Bye.